Ben Carter pushed his cleaning cart through the glass corridor on the 35th floor, the wheels squeaking against polished marble in a rhythm he'd memorized over 3 years. The Tech Air Industries building never truly slept. Even at 5 in the morning, lights glowed in executive offices, and the faint hum of ventilation systems created white noise that most people stopped hearing. But Ben heard everything. He'd trained himself to notice the things others missed, the small details that could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. It was a habit he couldn't break, even though it had cost him everything 8 years ago. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out below, still dark but beginning to show the first pale hints of dawn. Ben paused at the entrance to the executive suite, his hand resting on the cart handle, and looked at the display case mounted on the wall. Inside sat a scale model of the Tech Air Phoenix, the company's flagship helicopter design, sleek and modern. The placard beneath it read, "Innovation Award Winner, 2017. Chief Designer, Victoria Cross." Ben stared at that model longer than he should have. His fingers tightened on the cart handle until his knuckles went white. He knew every curve of that design, every engineering decision that had gone into its construction. He knew it because 8 years ago he'd helped create its predecessor. Before Victoria Cross had refined it, before Tech Air Industries had bought the patents, before everything had gone so terribly wrong. The elevator chimed. Ben released the cart handle and resumed pushing, his face carefully neutral. Victoria Cross emerged wearing a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. She was 38 years old and already legendary in the aerospace industry, the youngest person ever to earn the chief engineer position at a major aviation company. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. Ben had studied her for 3 years, learning her patterns, her habits, her blind spots. She walked past him without a glance, trailing expensive perfume and cold ambition. Ben had been invisible to her for 3 years. He preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety. Invisibility meant no one asked questions about why a janitor with calloused hands sometimes paused too long when looking at helicopter schematics left on desks, or why his eyes tracked engineering specifications with focused intensity. Ben finished the executive corridor and moved to the break room. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who watched his daughter Emma before school. "She's asking about her mom again. Told her you'd talk when you got home." Ben closed his eyes and leaned against the counter. Emma was 8 years old now. She asked about her mother more frequently these days, pressing for details that Ben didn't know how to give. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that her mother had died testing a helicopter that should never have been cleared for flight? How could he tell her that the people responsible had buried the truth under mountains of legal paperwork and forced Ben to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a settlement that barely covered Sarah's funeral? He couldn't, so he cleaned floors and emptied trash bins and watched Victoria Cross walk past him every morning, carrying the success that had been built on his wife's grave. The Tech Air Industries annual showcase was held in the main atrium, a cathedral of glass and steel that rose 6 stories high. Ben wasn't supposed to be there during the event, but he'd volunteered to stay on standby, to be invisible in the corner while the powerful people played their games of money and influence. The centerpiece stood on a raised platform in the center, a full-size Tech Air Phoenix helicopter, its rotors gleaming under professional lighting. Victoria Cross stood beside it like a high priestess at an altar, gesturing to different features as she spoke to a cluster of Air Force generals and defense contractors. "The Phoenix represents a quantum leap in rotorcraft engineering," she was saying. "Composite frame reduces weight by 30% while increasing structural integrity. The engine management system uses machine learning algorithms to optimize fuel efficiency in real time." One of the generals, a stern woman with silver hair and 4 stars on her collar, walked around the helicopter slowly. "Impressive presentation, Ms. Cross. But we've seen impressive presentations before. The question is whether this bird can actually fly." Victoria smiled. "General Morrison, I wouldn't have invited you here if I wasn't certain of the Phoenix's capabilities." She gestured to a young man in a Tech Air flight suit. "Lieutenant Chen here is our chief test pilot. Lieutenant, would you mind giving our guests a brief demonstration?" Lieutenant Chen nodded and climbed into the pilot's seat. The crowd stepped back as he began the pre-flight sequence, the whine of the engine spinning up, filling the atrium. Ben watched from his corner, his body tense. Something felt wrong. He couldn't articulate what it was, just a nagging sense of unease that prickled at the back of his neck. The engine noise changed pitch. Instead of the smooth ascending whine of a healthy turbine, there was a stuttering quality to it, a rhythmic hesitation that Ben's trained ear caught immediately. He straightened, taking an involuntary step forward. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Chen frowned at his instruments. He adjusted something, tried again. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died with a descending whine that sounded like a dying animal. Silence fell over the atrium. General Morrison raised an eyebrow. Victoria's smile froze on her face, her eyes widening with barely controlled panic. Lieutenant Chen climbed out, shaking his head. "Engine management system isn't responding. Could be the fuel pump relay, could be a software glitch. I'll need to run diagnostics." "How long will that take?" Victoria's voice was tight. "Couple hours minimum. Maybe more if we need replacement parts." The generals were already turning away, their expressions shifting from interest to professional skepticism. Victoria's carefully constructed showcase was collapsing in real time. The Phoenix was supposed to be reliable, cutting edge, perfect. A breakdown during the demonstration was worse than no demonstration at all. Victoria's gaze swept across the atrium, desperate and calculating. She made a decision in that instant, the kind of desperate, impulsive decision that people make when they're watching their dreams slip away. "Anyone here think they can fix it faster?" Her voice rang out across the atrium, too loud, too sharp. "Seriously, we've got 200 people in this room, engineers, mechanics, aviation experts. Someone must know rotorcraft systems." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fix this helicopter in the next 30 minutes, and I'll kiss you right now. Right here, in front of everyone." The crowd laughed nervously. It was clearly a joke, a moment of levity to diffuse the tension. But there was something manic in Victoria's eyes. Ben stood in his corner and felt the old instincts rising. He knew what was wrong with that helicopter. The symptom pattern, the stuttering engine, the non-responsive management system. He'd seen it before. 8 years ago, in a different helicopter, in a hangar that no longer existed. It was a specific type of failure in the fuel pump relay system, caused by a manufacturing defect. Sarah had identified it 3 days before her test flight. She'd written a memo recommending that all units using those components be grounded until replacements could be installed. Her supervisor had ignored the memo. "Cost savings," he'd said. "Schedule pressures." And then Sarah had climbed into that cockpit for what was supposed to be a routine test flight, and the fuel pump relay had failed at 3,000 feet, and the helicopter had dropped like a stone. Ben's hands were shaking. He looked at Victoria Cross standing beside her perfect Phoenix helicopter, and he saw Sarah standing beside the prototype 8 years ago. He looked at the generals turning to leave, and he saw the investigation board that had ruled Sarah's death an accident. He looked at the helicopter that was supposed to be cutting edge and perfect, and he saw the same goddamn components that had killed his wife. He took a step forward, then another. His legs moved without conscious thought, carrying him across the polished marble floor toward the raised platform. People turned to stare at the janitor walking toward the CEO with slow, deliberate steps. Victoria's gaze locked on him, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "I can fix it." Ben said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough from disuse, but steady, certain. Give me 20 minutes. Victoria's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Ben like she was seeing him for the first time. You're the janitor. Ben Carter, right? That's right. And you know helicopter engines. I know this engine. I know exactly what's wrong with it. Fuel pump relay failure, batch defect in the components. Takes 20 minutes to bypass the faulty unit and reroute through the backup system. The crowd was silent now, everyone watching. Victoria studied Ben's face, and he could see her mind working, evaluating, calculating odds. She was desperate enough to try anything. Fine, she said finally. You've got 20 minutes, but if you damage that helicopter, I won't. Ben climbed onto the platform and approached the Phoenix like a man approaching a ghost. His hands moved automatically, opening the engine access panel, tracing the fuel lines with fingers that remembered exactly where everything should be. The crowd pressed closer, watching. Victoria stood beside him, her arms crossed. Who are you? She asked quietly. Really? Ben didn't answer. He was already lost in the work, his mind slipping back into the patterns he'd thought he'd left behind 8 years ago. Engineer's brain, Sarah used to call it, the ability to see systems instead of parts, to understand how everything connected. It was the same skill that had made him one of the best rotorcraft engineers on the East Coast, before the accident, before the NDAs, before he'd buried that part of himself under a janitor's uniform. His fingers found the faulty relay exactly where he'd expected it to be. He traced the wiring, identifying the backup system, calculating the bypass procedure. 15 minutes later, he closed the access panel and stepped back. Try it now, he said to Lieutenant Chen. The pilot climbed back into the cockpit, skepticism written across his face. He initiated the startup sequence. The engine spun up smoothly this time, no stuttering, no hesitation, just the clean, powerful roar of a properly functioning turbine. The crowd erupted in applause and relieved laughter. General Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving. Victoria Cross stared at Ben with an expression that was equal parts shock, confusion, and dawning suspicion. How did you... she started. But Ben was already walking away, back toward his corner, back toward invisibility. His hands were still shaking, but now it was from something more than old trauma. It was fear, because Victoria Cross was smart, and she would ask questions, and Ben had just shattered 3 years of careful invisibility with 20 minutes of expertise that a janitor shouldn't possess. Behind him, he heard Victoria's voice, sharp and commanding. Mr. Carter, my office, now! Ben closed his eyes. The past had finally caught up to him, just like he'd always known it would. Victoria's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the 42nd floor, a space of glass walls and minimalist furniture that projected power and control. Ben stood in the center of that space, while Victoria circled him slowly like a predator evaluating prey. She'd sent everyone else away, closed the door, activated the privacy screens that turned the glass walls opaque. Sit, Victoria said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs. Ben remained standing. I need to get back to work. Sit. That wasn't a request. Ben sat. Victoria perched on the edge of her desk, studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. He forced himself to meet her gaze. I ran a background check on you after you fixed my helicopter, Victoria said. Took about 30 seconds. Ben Carter, 46 years old, been working as a janitor for Tech Air Industries for 3 years. Before that, various maintenance jobs. High school graduate, no college degree, no specialized training. Completely unremarkable employment history. She paused. Except that's not your real history, is it? Ben's jaw tightened. I don't know what you... Benjamin Carter, aerospace engineer, master's degree from MIT. 8 years ago, you worked for Skyward Dynamics as a senior rotorcraft designer. Then your name disappears from all professional records. She leaned forward. What happened 8 years ago, Mr. Carter? What happened at Skyward Dynamics? The room felt too small suddenly. Ben's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. I signed an NDA. I can't talk about it. Can't or won't? Both. Victoria tilted her head. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think there was an accident. A helicopter crash during testing. I think someone died, and Skyward Dynamics paid you to keep quiet. She paused. Am I close? Too close. Dangerously close. Ben forced himself to breathe slowly. If you already know, why are you asking? Because 3 years ago, Tech Air Industries acquired the intellectual property rights from Skyward Dynamics when they went bankrupt. We bought their helicopter designs, their patents, their research data. I spent 2 years refining those designs into the Phoenix. Victoria's voice dropped. And now you're telling me there's a batch defect in the fuel pump relays, the same relays we've installed in 15 production units. Ben's blood ran cold. You need to ground those helicopters. All of them. Now. On the word of a janitor with a suspicious past and no proof? On the word of an engineer who watched his wife die because someone ignored this exact same defect 8 years ago? The words erupted from Ben before he could stop them, raw and painful and true. Victoria froze, her eyes widening. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Your wife, Victoria said slowly. Sarah Carter. She was the test pilot who died at Skyward Dynamics. She was also an engineer, one of the best I've ever worked with. She identified the defect. She wrote a memo recommending grounding. Her supervisor, a man named Robert Hayes, ignored her. Ben's voice was flat now, empty of emotion. 3 days later, Sarah was dead. Robert Hayes buried the defect, blamed pilot error, and paid me enough money to keep quiet and go away. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Robert Hayes. That name sounds familiar. It should. 6 months after Skyward Dynamics went bankrupt, Robert Hayes became a business partner at Tech Air Industries. He's your VP of operations. The color drained from Victoria's face. Robert negotiated the Skyward acquisition. He told me those designs were sound. He lied. He's been lying for 8 years, and now he's about to do it again, with your helicopters and your military contract. Ben stood up. You asked me who I am? I'm the man who spent 8 years watching the person responsible for my wife's death prosper while I push a mop. I'm the man who took a janitor job at Tech Air specifically so I could keep watch, make sure Robert Hayes didn't kill anyone else. Why didn't you go to the authorities? I tried. The NDA made it illegal for me to discuss the defect. Robert had lawyers, money, connections. I had grief and rage and a daughter who'd just lost her mother. Victoria stood up, her face hard. If what you're saying is true, if Robert knowingly approved defective components, then he's committed fraud, criminal negligence. Ben pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and held it out. She took it, unfolding it carefully. It was a photocopy of a memo, dated 8 years ago, with Sarah Carter's signature at the bottom. The subject line read, Urgent, fuel pump relay defect in prototype units. Sarah made copies. Ben said quietly. She knew Hayes might try to bury her findings. She gave me this the night before her test flight. I've carried it with me every day for 8 years. Victoria read the memo twice, her expression growing darker. Hayes has been using the same supplier for the Phoenix relays, the same components, the same defect. She moved to her computer, typing rapidly. I need to check the installation records. The office door opened without warning. Robert Hayes stepped inside, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his silver hair impeccably styled. He smiled when he saw Victoria at her computer, but the smile froze when he noticed Ben. "Victoria, I heard there was an incident with the Phoenix demonstration," Robert said carefully. "General Morrison is asking questions." He stopped, his gaze locked on Ben. "Wait, I know you. You're the janitor. What are you doing in here?" Ben saw the exact moment when recognition hit. Robert's face went pale, his eyes widening. He knew. After 8 years, he knew that his past had finally caught up to him. "Ben Carter," Robert said slowly. "My God, I thought you'd left the city." "You thought I'd stay buried?" Ben's voice was cold. "You thought I'd take your money and forget that you killed my wife?" Victoria stepped between them, the memo clutched in her hand. "Robert, did you know about the fuel pump relay defect when you negotiated the Skyward acquisition?" Robert's gaze flickered to the memo. "I don't know what this man has told you, but answer the question. Victoria, there are things about that acquisition you don't understand." "You built an empire on my wife's grave!" Ben's voice was thunder. "And now you're about to do it again. How many pilots die this time, Robert?" The office door burst open. Victoria's assistant, her face pale. "Ms. Cross, there's been an incident. One of the Phoenix helicopters crashed during a training flight. The pilot ejected safely, but the preliminary report mentions engine failure. Something about the fuel pump relay." Victoria closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were hard as diamonds. She looked at Robert Hayes with pure contempt. "You're fired. Security will escort you from the building. I'm contacting the FAA, the DOD, and the FBI." Robert's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. I'm a partner in this company." "You had board support, until 30 seconds ago, when you implicitly admitted to criminal activity in front of witnesses." Victoria picked up her phone. "Security to the executive suite. Immediately." Security arrived. 2 large men escorted Robert Hayes from the office. He went quietly, but the look he shot at Ben was pure poison. Ben watched him go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no victory, just emptiness. Victoria turned to Ben. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say. You've been carrying this for 8 years. Don't," Ben said shortly. "Don't sympathize. Just fix the helicopters. Make sure no one else dies because of Robert Hayes's greed." "I will. I promise." Victoria hesitated. "What will you do now?" "I'm a father. I have an 8-year-old daughter who lost her mother and has barely seen her father for 8 years because I've been too consumed with rage to be present. The engineering career is over. But I need to go. My daughter gets out of school in 2 hours, and I promised her we'd talk about her mother today. That's more important than anything happening here." Victoria nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, Mr. Carter, your wife was trying to save lives. She was a hero. She was a victim. There's a difference." Ben walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. There's a component supplier in New Jersey. Hanson Aerospace. They manufacture relay units that meet the same specifications as the defective ones, but their quality control is actually reliable. I'll contact them today." Ben left the office and walked through the corridors of Tech Air Industries. People stared at him as he passed. Word had already spread. Ben ignored them all. He changed out of his uniform, collected his belongings, and walked out of the building. The afternoon sun was bright. Ben stood on the sidewalk, breathing fresh air, feeling the weight of 8 years slowly lifting. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Dad, are you coming home? We need to talk about Mom." Ben typed back. "On my way. I love you." He started walking. Behind him, Tech Air Industries rose into the sky like a glass monument to ambition and all the lies people told themselves. But Ben was done with all of that. He'd carried his rage for 8 years, and it had accomplished nothing except making him invisible to the people who mattered most. It was time to be visible again. Time to be a father. Mrs. Patterson's apartment smelled like cinnamon and old books. The elderly woman opened the door before Ben could knock. She'd been watching Emma since the girl was 3 months old, had been there the night Sarah died. She knew everything. "She's in the living room," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "She's been asking questions all day. Real questions, Ben." Emma sat on the floor, surrounded by drawing paper, her dark hair, Sarah's hair, falling across her face as she concentrated. She looked up when Ben entered, and her eyes, also Sarah's eyes, that particular shade of brown, studied him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "You're home early," Emma said. Not accusatory, just observant. Ben sat down on the couch. "Yeah, something important happened at work." "Are you in trouble?" "No. The opposite, actually." Ben gestured to the drawings spread across the floor. "What are you working on?" Emma hesitated, then gathered several papers and brought them to him. They were sketches, surprisingly detailed for an 8-year-old, of helicopters. Different models, different angles, each one carefully labeled. Ben's breath caught. "I've been learning about helicopters," Emma said. "At the library. Mrs. Patterson takes me every week. I wanted to understand what Mom did." She paused. "You never talk about her job, only about how she was nice and funny and loved me. But she was smart, too, wasn't she? She built things." "She was brilliant," Ben said, his voice rough. "One of the best engineers I've ever known." "Were you an engineer too, before you became a janitor?" The question landed like a physical blow. Ben had never lied directly to Emma, but he'd allowed her assumptions. He'd told himself it was protection, that she was too young. But looking at his daughter's sketches, at the precise lines that echoed Sarah's own drawing style, Ben realized that Emma had been searching for her parents, and he'd been too much of a coward to help her. "Yes," Ben said. "I was an engineer. I worked with your mother. We designed helicopters together." Emma's eyes widened. "Then why are you a janitor now?" "Because when your mother died, I was so angry and sad that I couldn't do that work anymore. It reminded me of her. It hurt too much." Ben pulled Emma onto the couch beside him. "But today, I had to be an engineer again, and it helped me understand something important." "What?" "That your mother's death wasn't just a sad accident. Someone made mistakes, bad choices, that caused it to happen. And that same person was about to make those choices again, so I had to stop him." Emma was quiet, processing. "Did you stop him?" "Yes, with help from my boss. The man who made those bad choices won't be able to hurt anyone else." "Good." Emma's voice was fierce. Then softer. "Tell me about Mom, about her work. I want to know everything." So Ben told her. He told her about how Sarah had approached helicopter design like a puzzle, how she'd seen connections that other engineers missed. He told her about late nights in the lab, Sarah humming while she worked. He told her about the day Sarah had discovered the fuel pump relay defect, how she'd spent 72 hours documenting everything, trying desperately to make people listen. "She was trying to save lives," Ben said. "Right up until the end, making sure people would be safe in the helicopters she designed." "But the bad man didn't listen." "No, he didn't." Emma leaned against Ben's shoulder. "I'm glad you stopped him. I think Mom would be proud. I think she'd be more proud of you. You're so much like her, Emma. The way you ask questions, the way you want to understand how things work. That's all, Sarah. Do you think she'd be disappointed that you stopped being an engineer?" Ben thought about the last 8 years, the rage, the obsession, the way he'd buried himself in invisibility and grief. I think she'd be disappointed that I stopped being your father. For a long time I was so focused on being angry that I forgot to be present. I'm sorry for that, Emma. Emma wrapped her arms around him. You were sad. Mrs. Patterson says it's okay to be sad when someone dies. It's okay to be sad, but I let the sadness turn into something else, something that kept me from really seeing you. Ben pulled back to look at Emma's face. That changes now. No more overnight shifts, no more hiding. I'm going to be here, really here. And if you want to learn about engineering, about helicopters, I'll teach you, just like your mother would have. Really? Really? Emma smiled, and it was Sarah's smile, bright and genuine. Can we start tomorrow? I have so many questions about rotor blade design. Ben laughed, the sound surprising him with its lightness. Tomorrow, I promise. They sat together, father and daughter, and for the first time in 8 years, Ben felt like he was finally coming home. 6 months later, Ben stood in a Tech Air Industries hangar, watching Emma examine a helicopter with careful attention. She'd spent the months learning everything Ben could teach her, supplemented by weekend workshops at Tech Air that Victoria had personally arranged. The Phoenix redesign was complete, all defective components replaced with Hanson aerospace relays. The military contract was back on track. Victoria approached, carrying a folder. Ben, I have news. The Pentagon has awarded us the next-generation military transport helicopter contract. It's the largest defense aviation contract in 20 years. That's incredible, Ben said. Congratulations. The contract has a condition. They want you as chief safety consultant on the design team. Full-time. Victoria handed him the folder. The salary is competitive. More importantly, the terms include flexible hours, work-from-home options, and a clause that says family time is non-negotiable. You set the schedule. Ben opened the folder, his eyes widening. This was the kind of offer that could transform a life. He looked at Emma, who was taking notes on the helicopter's control systems. There's one more thing, Victoria said. The Pentagon wants Sarah Carter's name on the new design. Not just a memorial plaque, they want her listed as inspirational designer, with formal recognition in all the documentation. They say she pioneered safety-first thinking in military rotorcraft engineering. Ben felt his throat tighten. 8 years ago, Sarah's name had been buried under NDAs and corporate shame. Now it would be on military helicopters, teaching new generations about refusing to compromise on safety. Emma looked up from her notes. Dad, are you going to build helicopters again? Maybe, Ben said. But only if you're okay with it. Mom built helicopters, Emma said. Mrs. Patterson told me Mom wanted to make flying safer for everyone. If you can do that too, I think you should. Ben looked at Victoria, then back at his daughter. Okay, but I have conditions. Name them, Victoria said. I work 40 hours a week maximum, no exceptions. If Emma has a school event, a doctor's appointment, even just a bad day, I'm there. Work comes second. Agreed. I want full veto power over any component choice. If I say something isn't safe, we don't use it. Period. Done. And I want Sarah Carter's name on the Phoenix. A dedication plaque, public recognition. She identified this defect 8 years ago. She deserves credit for saving the lives we're saving now. Victoria extended her hand. I'll have the plaque designed this week. Do we have a deal? Ben shook her hand. We have a deal. Emma cheered, throwing her arms around Ben's waist. Victoria smiled, a genuine expression. She'd built her career on being ruthless, on prioritizing results over relationships. But watching Ben hug his daughter, seeing the way his entire body relaxed, Victoria felt something shift in her understanding of success. Thank you, Ben said, for believing me, for acting when you could have buried it all. I spent 8 years building Tech Air's reputation, Victoria said. I'm not going to destroy it by valuing profits over people. Your wife taught me that, even though I never met her. She would have liked you, Ben said. Sarah respected people who admitted mistakes and fixed them. Victoria walked away, leaving father and daughter to their afternoon. Behind her, she heard Emma asking excited questions about the new job, whether she could visit the hangar, if maybe someday she could design helicopters too. Ben's answers were patient and detailed, the voice of a man who was finally able to talk about the work he loved. 8 years after Sarah Carter's death, Ben stood in a hangar, watching his daughter examine a helicopter with the same careful attention Sarah used to show. Emma was 16 now, tall and confident and brilliant, with scholarship offers from MIT and Stanford. She'd spent 8 years learning everything Ben could teach her about engineering. The blade angle is off by 0.3 degrees, Emma said, using a digital level. Within tolerance, but it'll cause unnecessary drag. Good catch, Ben said. What's your recommendation? Adjust the pitch mechanism. Takes about 20 minutes. Do it! Emma pulled out her tools and began the adjustment with practiced efficiency. Ben watched her work and saw Sarah in every movement, the same careful precision, the same refusal to accept good enough when perfect was achievable. Last week, Emma had received her acceptance letter from MIT's Aerospace Engineering program with a full scholarship. The same program Sarah had graduated from 24 years ago. When Emma had told Ben the news, she'd cried. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Emma had asked. Becoming an engineer like Mom? You're not trying to be her, Ben had said. You're trying to be you, and you is someone who loves understanding how things work, who sees problems as puzzles to solve. That's not Sarah's legacy. That's your own gift. Now, watching Emma finish the rotor adjustment with a satisfied nod, Ben felt the last pieces of 8-year-old grief finally settle into something manageable. Sarah's death would always hurt. But it had also become part of a larger story now, one where Sarah's courage had prevented future tragedies, where her daughter carried forward her commitment to safety and excellence. Dad, Emma said, wiping oil from her hands. Ms. Cross wants to talk to us. They found Victoria in her office. The minimalist space had changed over the years. The walls now displayed photographs of testing crews, engineering teams, the dedication ceremony for Sarah's memorial plaque. There was humanity in this space now. Emma, Ben, Victoria greeted them. I wanted to share the news personally. The Pentagon has awarded Tech Air the next-generation military transport helicopter contract. That's incredible, Ben said. The contract has a condition. They want Emma Carter as a junior engineer on the design team. The assignment would begin after your freshman year, as a summer internship that could transition into a permanent position after graduation. They've reviewed your science fair projects, your safety protocol recommendations. The Pentagon believes you're going to be one of the most important voices in aviation safety. Emma looked at Ben, seeking guidance. He smiled. It's your choice, Emma. I want to do it. Emma said. I want to build helicopters that keep people safe, like Mom tried to do. Then we'll make it happen. Victoria pulled out a folder. There's one more thing. The Pentagon wants Sarah Carter's name on the new design, not just a memorial plaque. They want her listed as inspirational designer, with formal recognition in all documentation. Ben felt his throat tighten. 8 years ago, Sarah's name had been buried. Now it would be on military helicopters, teaching new generations about the importance of refusing to compromise on safety. She would have hated the attention, Ben said. But she would have loved that people are finally listening. People are listening because you refused to stay silent, Victoria said. That's the kind of integrity the world needs. Emma squeezed Ben's hand. They left Victoria's office together, walking through hallways where Ben had once pushed a mop while nursing rage and grief. Those days felt like a different lifetime now. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. A Tech Air helicopter passed overhead, one of the new Phoenixes, carrying the Sarah Carter Memorial plaque and the safety systems that Ben had fought to implement. Emma watched it go, shading her eyes. "I miss her," Emma said quietly. "Even though I barely remember her. I miss who she was." "Me too," Ben said. "Every day." "But we're doing what she would have wanted, right? Making sure other people are safe?" "Yeah, kiddo. We're doing exactly that." They stood together in the parking lot, watching the helicopter disappear. And Ben thought about invisible men and visible truths, about the courage it took to face reality. He thought about Sarah's last memo, the one she'd written knowing it might cost her everything, choosing integrity over career advancement. He thought about Victoria's transformation. He thought about Robert Hayes sitting in a prison cell. But mostly, Ben thought about Emma. Brilliant, brave Emma, who'd grown up in the shadow of tragedy, but had chosen to turn that shadow into light. Who'd learned her mother's profession not as a burden, but as a calling. "Come on," Ben said. "Let's go home. We can celebrate your MIT acceptance and your Pentagon internship. I'm thinking pizza. Extra cheese? Always extra cheese." They walked to Ben's car. The invisible janitor had become visible again, and life had become something more than survival. As they drove home, Ben glanced at Emma sketching helicopter modifications in a notebook, her face focused and intent, and he thought, this is what Sarah died for. Not for Robert Hayes's greed or corporate success. She died standing up for what was right, refusing to compromise on safety, even when it meant standing alone. And now she wasn't alone anymore. Her daughter carried her torch. Her widower honored her memory by ensuring no one else would die from negligence. Her name would be on helicopters for generations. Sarah Carter had tried to stop a tragedy and had become one instead. But her death hadn't been meaningless. It had planted seeds that took 8 years to grow, but had finally bloomed into something beautiful. A company that valued integrity, a daughter who would carry forward her mother's mission, a father who'd learned that visibility mattered more than vengeance. "I love you, Dad," Emma said, not looking up from her notebook. "I love you too, Emma." And in the space between those simple words, Ben felt Sarah's presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living legacy. The helicopters would fly. The pilots would be safe. The next generation would learn that some things were worth fighting for. Sarah Carter had been right 8 years ago. She was still right today. And she would be right forever, her name carried by machines that kept people alive because someone had refused to be silenced. Ben pulled into their driveway as the last light faded. Inside, pizza would be ordered, Emma's acceptance letter would be admired, and they would talk about the future spreading out before them like an open sky. That was immortality, not in monuments or memorials, but in the quiet persistence of right work that echoed forward through time. "Come on, kiddo," Ben said. "Let's go celebrate everything your mother made possible." They went inside together, and the door closed behind them, and the world kept spinning. But in that house, in that moment, Sarah Carter's courage lived on, not as tragedy, but as triumph.